Hello, everyone. Welcome to IA Talks Innovation, the podcast where we dive into the big ideas shaping the world of the future of investment management, as well as future of technology in itself. Today is a very, very special episode as you join me, Shruti, your host, along with John, in finding out more about the world of tokenization. John, tell us more what's happening. There's been a new publication, and we've got a very special guest today.
We have. Very delighted to be at the FCA today. Now, the Investment Association and the wider industry has been co-creating on fund tokenization across a number of years now. So really pleased that the FCA has now published a paper, and we're here with Nike Trost, who's the Interim Director of Buy-Side, to explain exactly what's happening. So Nike, great to have you along with us today. It'd be great to hear from you, an introduction and what you've just published.
Yeah, John, it's fantastic to be able to be here. So as you say, we've been working with the industry on tokenization for quite some time. And we published a paper to really summarize what we're doing in this space, to provide clarity on how firms can implement the blueprint that the IA published a little while ago. I'm sure we'll come back to that. We're introducing the concept of direct to fund. And again, we'll probably unpack that, but really to support tokenization. And then we also look at, in that paper, at specific use cases. So how firms might hold assets such as stablecoins, crypto-native to network for non-investment purposes to settle units, for example. We look at how public permissionless chains might be used, and we clarify the use of money market funds. And then there's a chapter in there that really speaks to long-term future, asking question what the FCA can do to support a vision there, really with a view of some of the debates around tokenization of flows rather than funds and what might need to happen to make that possible. And I think it's really important we do this at this point in time because the next generation is investing differently. So when we look at our data, for example, from our Financial Life survey, younger investors prefer a more direct relationship with their investment. 49% of investment platform users are 55 years and above, whereas 47% of users using neo-brokers are between 18 and 34. So it really speaks to a changing environment, and tokenization has a role to play in bringing people along with different ways of investing.
Brilliant. So I've been doing the conference rounds. John and I have been in a few places, and those are all buzzwords: money market funds, tokenization, digital assets. And I think everyone's going to be very, very excited about this one. But before we move to the future of things, I wanted to sort of dial back a little bit, go back 2 years ago when the Asset Management Task Force's Tech Working Group published the blueprint for fund tokenization, and a lot of our audience using this podcast to hack it. What would you say were some of the key features of that blueprint, and how has the FCA moved the dial since that blueprint has come out? Just a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, I see the blueprint really as a first stage of enabling UK funds to use DLT for operational efficiencies. The blueprint envisaged that dealing in fund units would be reflected on or take place through blockchain-based records with conventional processes used for cash movement, pending wider adoption of on-chain cash instrument or money-like instruments, so stablecoins, say. And the blueprint really helped with the development of regulatory regime for that relatively simple model. We adopted that within our rules in 2023, or we confirmed that firms could use that model as part of our existing rules. But we had a lot of feedback since that where firms were not sure about how they could adopt the model. For example, whether they could use public networks, how they would be able to meet our rules on unilaterally updating the register. And what we've done in our publication today is really take that blueprint and then give people more certainty on how they can adapt that for their business and how they can make that work under our rules.
And in some other jurisdictions, we've seen funds utilise public permission change, and you mentioned that was a key aspect of the publication that's come out. That's a little bit of a change, I guess, from the blueprint model that we had originally. So how has the FCA's stance on this changed, and what were your considerations when looking at that matter?
Yeah, so in 2023, when we talked about public chains, it's really easier for everyone in the group to say, okay, if you have this private chain, some of these questions are quite easy to resolve because you have someone in control, essentially. And what we're really trying to do here is move things forward whilst keeping some of the protections that you would expect in a regulated environment. So what we're saying in this paper is that firms can use public networks so long as they have the appropriate controls in place to meet the outcomes in our rules and comply with the relevant regulations. So, for example, data privacy is really important here. Our guidance sets out how firms might think about that in a DLT context. I think it is right that we ask firms to evidence that they're meeting the current requirements when they use technology in a different way, whether it's DLT or whether they're using other technologies. We're really trying to be agnostic about how these protections are achieved technologically, but our guidance intends to help firms to think about how they navigate it. For example, we have really important rules that the manager has unilateral control over the register. This is so that the manager can process decisions, process live events, resolve fraud, manage unit holder defaults, correct mistakes, all of those good things that manager will be used to. They still need to be able to do that. That can be achieved in various ways in which we point the firms to in our guidance. So firms could use smart contracts to ensure that only whitelisted wallet addresses are allowed to hold units. Firms might have no direct controls over private keys with integrated digital wallets and APIs. So firms could use master node functionality, or they may have a contractual relationship with the end investors. These things together can create protections. And we set out some guidance in our paper on how we are thinking about some of these things.
Super, Nike. Clearly, the FCA has spent a lot of time having conversations, mostly in the last year or so, directly with firms, trying to understand the technology, but not just that, trying to understand what firms are actually trying to do and trying to solve for that. And that's really well received with the industry. It would be really good to get some color on what are some of these conversations, what were they about, what are the common concerns, questions they've asked you, and most importantly, where are the use cases within the UK framework and what you've seen around that?
Look, it's really important to me that firms know that we have an open door and we're really open to speaking to them about innovations they want to think about for their business. And that can be through a sandbox, but it can also importantly be outside the sandbox. We're really happy to speak to managers about the ideas they have. What we have seen through conversations is that there are really some themes that emerge. Some of those are not just regulatory. It's often about how the infrastructure and common standards will develop and what needs to happen to get to kind of scale propositions. We're keeping our ears really close to the ground, trying to work with global counterparts as well, for example, through Project Guardian, and we're following closely the Global Layer 1 project, which is trying to encourage the development of international standards to ensure interoperability. And then when it comes to use cases, we still hear a lot about use of tokenized money market funds as collateral, as an accessible use of DLT in the near term. This would increase transparency and may reduce the need to redeem MMF units during times of stress. But there are obviously also questions that arise from that kind of novel use. So we're definitely interested in hearing more about how firms are thinking about that. And then we're hearing a lot about potential for democratization of different assets and ultimately about different distribution of funds. But I think there's a lot of work that will still need to happen to make those use cases come real.
So you mentioned digital money briefly there, Nike. And of course, we've just been through stablecoin summer, which has really opened up stablecoins as a conversation topic within the industry. But what would be your view of the role of digital money and indeed other digital assets, such as a digital UK gilt that the government is currently out for tender to get suppliers for, but also crypto assets within funds?
Yeah, really important question there. We know that if you want a fully on-chain fund, then clearly you need digital assets of some sort to settle that. We, in this paper, explore how we can support that kind of development. So, for example, through a range of sandboxes or waivers or modification of our existing rules, we could support firms in taking forward innovative propositions whilst there's still this environment of lots of change going on in the background in relation to stablecoins. So we're really trying to dual track this and ask questions about how we can help firms innovate whilst there's still some developments underway, especially in relation to stablecoins. Now, this is very much about using these assets for non-investment purposes. So that might be for settlement of the fund units, but also, of course, because we know funds might need these to pay for certain things like gas fees. The question of these assets as investment assets is slightly separate from that, and that's something we need to look at in due course. It's not something we touch on in this paper. It's something we really want to take forward in a more measured way.
And then talk to us about the future vision. So there's been lots of work done in various fora over the last couple of years in terms of trying to predict the future of investment management in a digital market ecosystem. You mentioned at the start that there's a section on that future vision and where things could go in the long term. So what's the FCA's current thinking on this?
Yeah, and I think that's a really exciting part of this work, thinking through where the industry might go in the long term. Many firms see the eventual end state for tokenization as a form of tokenized portfolio management, effectively. This is where firms can use scalability and automation of DLT to efficiently manage portfolios at a retail investor level. A key part of this is the idea of composable finance, which we're engaging with the industry and mass on, and including as part of the Guardian work. That's probably many years in the future, but it's really exciting to think through how that might evolve. Innovation may allow firms to offer investment service outside the fund structure then, where scalability and diversification benefits of mutualization are not needed because the investor might end up holding fractional assets. That might allow wealth management style investment propositions such as model portfolios to be used at scale. Clearly not for us to shape the future and say it should be one model or another, but we've included a chapter on our future vision because there are some of these ambitious ideas in industry, and we're really looking to understand how this might evolve and what we might need to do to think through that our rules work and can facilitate innovation, and so that we can remove blockers where there are blockers.
Thank you, Nike. I think there's some really positive aspects to this paper, whether it's about the use of public permission chains, the use of stablecoin for operational purposes, or just engaging on the longer term vision of where things might go in the digital ecosystem. So this is a bit of a landmark moment, I think, in terms of innovation within the investment ecosystem, but also potentially the view of the regulator looking sort of forward thinking and thinking about how the world might change in the future. So there's more to dive into in the second part, where we're going to be looking at the director fund proposals. But for now, Shruti, I think that was a great overview.
Yeah, super. And do remember, this is indeed a consultation. So while John and I have been playing podcast hosts here and there, with our day jobs are still very much looking at policy and responding to consultations. Please do engage with us and the FCA on these questions. You've said public chains, MMF, smart contracts, and they've heard you. And there's probably more to be said. So we will be taking in those views. Thank you for listening. And thank you so much, Nike.